Anja, welcome, and we're glad to have you with us. To all our listeners, welcome to the Fifth Disciplines podcast, where we talk about people, brand, and systems. Our content is geared around enabling climate change players in Africa to scale. So if you haven't already, remember to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on LinkedIn for the latest news and updates. Today's podcast, we're going to focus on the theme of people. With us, we have Anja Visagie, who is the Chief Growth and Marketing Officer of SPS, a leading renewables asset management company that operates in the SADC region, and also part of the Gridworks portfolio. So welcome, Anja.
Hi, Lindy. Thanks so much for having me.
Pleasure. So over the last couple of years, SPS has really grown. I think you've got about 80 staff already. Can you tell me a bit about your team complement and just a bit about your team and its demographics?
Sure. Look, I've been at SPS now for 15 years, so I've been very fortunate enough to see the company grow from the initial 2 employees, of which I was the number 1 with the founder, Axel Scholler, and growing it to 80 people. So it's definitely changed a lot over the course of 15 years. I think, in the area in which I specialize, which is the design area, typically it was me. And, initially it was just me and doing all the different facets of the business. But now obviously as the business grows, we've gotten a lot more people on board and, and the team on my side, which is design, has basically grown from myself and 1 single designer supporting to, a team of 8 people. And I can speak for my own team as well as the broader team. And, with the growing team, there comes a lot of complexities in the sense that, you suddenly have a lot more people that has to know all the information. You can't just have it all in your own head. So I think in the sense of, having more people is to have better processes in place to kind of communicate better. Communication is such a key thing. And I think also in terms of the demographics, we're an engineering business. And, typically engineering businesses are dominated by, males. But I'm glad to say that, in SPS, we've got quite a number of females also on the engineering and the technical side, as well as in the asset management side. So the team has grown and, we've got people from all over the country. I always like to say that, we specialize in solar PV design, but we've basically had all types of engineers within the business, except chemical engineers. So, people from all different backgrounds in terms of what they studied, where they come from, what their culture is, and all of that. So it's definitely a learning experience to kind of engage with people on different levels and just understanding what makes people tick. I think the biggest learning experience for me was like dealing with so many diverse members of staff is that, in the way in which you communicate with someone, it's almost like that, love languages thing, where you kind of talk to someone in the way you want to be spoken to, or you respond to the same kind of things that you respond to. And, obviously, if you're in a business of 80 people, the chances of people having the same love language as you is like very little. So it's kind of just to understand, what the differences is between the people and kind of finding what it is that that person responds to.
Yeah, and I think that whole concept of nature versus nurture, so besides the personalities, people have grown up in different backgrounds, so they have different ways that they perceive and access and sort of understand and make decisions. So being aware of how to communicate best with them in a way that resonates really goes a long way. But I mean, Anja, like you said, you've been around with SPS since the day dot pretty much. And as you've evolved as a leader and moved up the management ladder, what are some of the tools or skills that you've needed to learn over the years? And what would you say were some of the most challenging to master and why?
Look, I think it's definitely a challenge to move up and manage people and managing multiple people as well. I mean, I don't profess to be an expert by any means. And I think the biggest thing that you can learn is to never stop learning, and always kind of see where you can improve. But I think if I have to pinpoint the main thing that I found the most challenging was to delegate. As an engineer myself, we're very process driven and we want to kind of solve the problem. So sometimes you kind of have to let go and, you can't do it all yourself, especially if it's a growing business. But I think the biggest thing is also if you have a team, you as a leader have a responsibility to also kind of have that team grow and learn and teach them. And if you kind of do everything for them, they're not going to learn. I think my biggest challenge is I want to take care of everyone in the team, and I don't want them to fail, and I want to help them out, and I want to be there to catch them if they fall. But in doing that, you don't give people necessarily the opportunity to grow and to kind of make their own mistakes. And I think that's very important. I'm not saying that you should throw people into the deep end and just let them swim. But it is important to create a space where people can venture out and do their own thing and give them the kind of responsibility to take on new things. And then if they make a mistake, that's the best way you learn, right? But to create a space where they're also not scared to make mistakes. I think that is the most important thing. So I think delegation was definitely one of the biggest things that I struggled with.
Yeah. And I think a lot of leaders, when they're moving up in their career growth as a leader, they do battle with, letting go and, enabling the team to take the reins and things like that. But I mean, in that perspective, can you speak to an experience where you can elaborate on that, where you've been involved in a difficult situation where you've had to let go, and what were some of the biggest leadership lessons you learned there while you were on that journey of
Yes. Yeah, I think it's maybe not a difficult situation. I think it was more of a funny situation, but I learned a lot from it. Is that when I had my first child, which was about 10 years ago, we were still a smallish team. So it was basically myself and one other design engineer that was responsible for all the preliminary designs and costing for the business. And we worked together for a few years, and then I had to go on maternity leave for 4 months. And when I got back, I think the most impactful thing he said to me is that he's so glad that I did go on maternity leave, because he learned the most that he ever learned in that 4 months as opposed to the 2 years he worked before at SPS. So it's always a joke in the company always that you kind of have just to go on maternity leave and give your team the space to grow when you're not there. So it was, I think at that point in my career, a good lesson for me, because at that time I was still very kind of I'm not saying micromanaging, but having a hand in everything and making sure everything is right. And it is your responsibility to do that. But like I said, you kind of have to give the guys a space, because if you don't give them the full responsibility, they're not always going to take it. It's if there's someone to catch you, you're not going to necessarily do all the triple checks and the quadruple checks, because there's always going to be someone on the other side. So it is important to create that space, but also to provide guidance and not just say, okay, you must do this now. Obviously always provide guidance. But if there's mistakes made, then I can promise you won't make them again.
One way to do it. And I think that also creates that sense of responsibility, and at least then they can feel proud of the work that they've done, knowing that they, have been there from one end to the next. And I mean, on that note, you also mentioned this whole concept of communication, but how, in your view, do you, when there's so many different personalities, there's this major shift to working online as well, or you have teams working in different offices and in different times, how do you increase that collaboration with the team and making sure that those different personalities, I mean, sometimes you have introverts on the one side and extroverts on the other side, and sometimes people are scared to speak up. Often the more junior staff are maybe a bit scared to voice their ideas and opinions. How do you go about fostering that collaboration? And are there any strategies and tools that you found that work?
Sure. Look, I think, there was quite a lot in that question. So I think, there's a few things that I can maybe comment on. I think, to foster a kind of culture of collaboration, it's very important that, the team works as a cohesive unit. And how we do that, or how I've implemented here at SPS, is that it's always a culture of helping each other. So we all have different experiences. We all have different levels of experience as well. And it is so critical that everyone in the team jumps in to help someone if they are struggling. And, what we've done is that there's certain aspects of design where some people have more experience or can be seen as experts in that specific element. And we empower them to teach the young engineers that come in or assist if there's like a tricky thing. So it gives them that space to put forth their knowledge. And even if they are someone that doesn't necessarily speak up a lot, it's very introverted, because most engineers really are, it gives them the space to kind of showcase what they can do, but in a forum where it's more one-on-one with someone rather than like broadcasting it in like a lecture, or, speaking up for the whole team. So, by helping out each other, I've learned that it really builds a good bond between the team. And, if someone's in trouble, they will ask for help, and then lots of people will jump in, like we work a lot with deadlines, and sometimes you just run out of time and you've got to say, guys, I need some help. And then everyone will jump in to help. So I think that to create such an atmosphere and a kind of collaboration culture in your team is very important. I think, what you said about people, might be quiet or working online and maybe falling through the cracks. We have adopted the agile methodology of Scrum. And what we do in that is that we have a daily stand-up. So the whole team, either if they're working from home, they dial in, everyone meets up for 15 minutes every day. Just have a quick check-in where everyone is, what they're struggling with, what they're working on, so that everyone also has an idea. And also we've brought in, if you need help, we're saying, I'm not going to make it, quickly jump in, who can help me? And people volunteer it themselves. So it's not that there's one person that's like, you will do this and you must help there. It's kind of everyone kind of takes, that gives people a sense of ownership and responsibility.
I think that's quite interesting. You speak about agile. As leaders, one of the biggest challenges is, trying to juggle multiple balls, and especially in the environment that you're in where, it's fast paced, there are deadlines, and, people need to achieve that. I don't know if you've heard of planned continuation bias, or concept of get there artists.
No, I don't. Oh, but I think get there, I do get what you mean. Yeah.
So pilots use the term get there artists, and it's this notion where sometimes you need to diverse from the original plan because things change, and you have to sort of change a plan and not be fixated on the end goal. So that concept of including agile methodologies and communicating with your team is so pivotal, because without that collaboration and communication, someone might become fixated and you get into this motion of continuous deadlines. But if you can't manage it properly as a leader, then your team burns out, and it's tough for them. On that note as well, your speaking of team burnout and this fast-paced environment, what have you found that works in terms of keeping your team motivated and inspired?
Yeah, look, I think, in our renewable energy industry, and especially in the team which I work in, which, like I said, is kind of the guys that does the initial designs and the detailed designs as well as the costing. So it's very high-paced, because it's kind of the kind of says a support crew for the business developers to get offers out to clients, and then there's tenders and things. So it is really fast-paced. There's a lot of pressure, and the engineers also have to kind of toe the line between being commercial and making it technically viable. So it's a lot to juggle. Look, I think the agile methodology works very well, like you said, because things do change, and get there itis is definitely a thing that happens, in the sense that people can get fixated on something, and then they have tunnel vision, and it's like, this is the way we do things, and I must just get there. And that happens often, especially with newer engineers, because they're under the pressure. And I think it's important as a leader, you can't get stuck in it. And it's hard, because you also are driven to complete things, but you kind of got to step out of it and retain the focus. And that's where things like urgent versus important and those type of things also come in, that you can give the guy some perspective to say, okay, we've got a lot to do. what is it we can do and what is it we can't do, because there's always way too many things to be done. And also advocating for your team with the people that are requesting the information is kind of saying, okay, guys, you want 50 things to be done. This team can logistically only do 20. And just being almost like an advocate or a buffer in a way to kind of say, okay, this is what we can do. But then whatever we commit to, the team has to kind of on their own accord, like be responsible for and say, we will do this. And that's why that Scrum methodology works quite well, because you as a person stand up every day and say, I commit to doing this. And then it's not, again, like I said, it's not you telling someone to do it. They actually say, no, I will take this up and do it. So I think that helps a lot. And I think also the collaborative nature, of the team and fostering that helps people for burnout. I think my number one rule in the team is always don't suffer in silence. Because like you rightly said earlier, people of engineers don't talk. Now you're under pressure. And engineers, like I said, I can speak for myself, is we want to solve the problem. We want to get it done. And now you're sitting there, you're struggling, you're not speaking up. So my number one rule is just speak up. If you're struggling, if you need help, it is so important, because you can sit there for days trying to solve this element because you're like, I can do this, I'm an engineer. But if you just ask for help, you could have maybe, only spent one day on it, and you could have not been on this deadline crunch dying at the end of the path here. So it's kind of trying to be that for your team and like I said, to step out of that get there writers and trying to see the broader picture and try and help the team to see it as well.
Yeah, it goes a long way. And I think a lot of that speaks to building trust with your team, where they are open to communicate with you. I was listening to a really interesting podcast where they spoke about, as a leader, you don't always have the answer to everything. And by building trust with your team, you're able to and show that you're vulnerable. Sometimes the best ideas come forward from your team, and that innovation is brought forward. Have you had experiences where you've needed to build trust, and how did that look and how did it pan out?
Yeah, look, I think it's important to build trust with your team in any event. I think that's a very important lesson that I've learned, is that if someone doesn't trust you, they're not necessarily going to do the speak up thing, right? So for me, it's very important to treat people as people. We are all working, we've all got goals and we all have deadlines, but at the end of the day, you're still a person. Person has things that happen at home. People have kids, people have, family. And to recognize that and, just to kind of speak to people in a way that you're not just giving them tasks, but also kind of just finding out what they have to say, right? And when they have a problem, that they can come to you. And I think it generally starts with people ask for leave, right? Like people need the day off just to show that interest and say, like, I understand your problem and please take the time you need. And I think people never generally take advantage of that because they recognize that you're kind of giving them the space to deal with this personal issue that they have. So I think it's kind of dealing with people as people and building trust. And like you say, it is important also to show vulnerability yourself. And I think to acknowledge that as a leader, you don't have the answers, and you can say that to your team, like, guys, I don't know what the answer is, but let's figure it out together. There are some more other smart people in this business. Let's go ask them, And I think and I've seen it with some of my team members as well, is that, people feel like they have to know the answers. And if they don't, then they're failing. And I think as a leader, and I actually learned that from my mentor, Axel Scholo, who's the founder of SBS. I always thought, like, to be a leader, you must be the most smartest person in the room, and you've got to know all the answers. You've got to have your shit together. Oh, sorry, I've got your stuff together all the time. Sorry.
That out. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry. You've got to have it all together. And, you showed me that, it's okay not to have the answers all the time. I think, and acknowledging that in front of your team and even in front of clients, if you don't have the answer straight away, you can say, look, I don't know what this is right now, but I'll get back to you. And I think that shows, team members that are, less senior than you, that it's okay. It's okay not to know. And you must find out, but you don't have to know everything. And I think that also just shows a human element that people can relate to, and I think just enables them to trust you more, rather than pretending to always have the answers and not necessarily having them.
Oh, exactly. And I mean, Anja, I've worked with you in the past, and I know one of the things that sort of stood out to me, and when we've had chats in the past too, is that as a leader, don't be scared to roll up your sleeves. And I think that sort of also speaks to that building trust as a leader. You know, don't let the team feel alone when that big deadline's coming up. And I think that's, that's really a great quality to have, especially for a lot of the young people.
No, thanks, Lindy. Oh, no, look, it is really important, because I think it also, you can talk the talk, but you've got to walk the talk, right? You've got to show them that you're also willing to get in the trenches, help them out, work with them. We're in it together, and physically show that to them, and not just say that. If the deadline's at 5 o'clock, you are going to be there until 5 o'clock to get it done with them and help them, not just, leave and say, you figure it out. So I think, by showing people that you're in it with them, like you rightly said, also, helps build that trust.
We sort of touched on the aspect of inspiring and motivating team members. And recently I did a study, or conducted a survey and produced a report on culture killers. And one of the interesting insights that I found anyway was that as professionals tend to gain experience in a company, their perception of company culture tends to erode. And with that comes, the concept of inspiration and motivation for themselves. So as a leader yourself, where do you turn to, or, what inspires and motivates you and keeps you getting up in the morning? Because at the end of the day, as you become a leader, you gain more and more skills, but what is keeping you excited, and how do you stay motivated?
No, it's a very good question, because that is true. I think, when you start out, you kind of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and if you kind of, move up, you've got a bigger insight into the business as a whole, and you see all the good things, you see all the bad things, and, you've got different goals and aspirations, as you grow in the business. I think, for me personally, I think the nice thing where I am now in the business in a senior position, is that I actually have influence as to where the business goes strategically. Not obviously all by myself, but, I can affect change. So I think for me, that motivates me a lot and inspires me a lot to be a good leader, and to kind of think outside the box and push myself also to look at different facets of the business that I not necessarily have looked at before in the past. If you kind of not stuck, but if you are in a focused position, like a design engineer, you've kind of do your thing, you've got certain goals, and you kind of stick with it. Where I think is, if you move into a leadership position, you've got the opportunity to kind of look broader, look to the future, see how you can change things, because you have the ability to do so. And I think the other thing that I really enjoy about being a leader, and that motivates me, is that I get to work with a team. And I think, it's inspiring to work with a team and test yourself to see how you can get the best out of your team. Because at the end of the day, I think for me personally, I think a good sign of a leader is if you can really have a team that gives the best that they can, because you've kind of helped them grow and given them opportunity to do so. So I think, it's kind of having to work with a team that motivates me. And I think for me also, it's like, I like challenges. Again, engineering brain, solve the problem, Plus, I'm very competitive, so I want to win. So that's also important. So challenges is for me good. And I'm actually really enjoying the challenge of growing the team. And like I said earlier, like dealing with people, different cultures, different backgrounds. And, I've got opportunity now. I've historically dealt with a team that's younger than I am. Now I've got a team that's all older than I am. So it's like a different dynamic that I've got to learn now, and how to engage with people of that demographic. So it's always constant learning, it's always new. And I think that's what makes it fun for me. Like, even like I've been in the position, not position in this business and in the same business for 15 years, you would think, oh, she must be so over it by now, but but the nice thing, is like, as you grow in the business, there's different things you look at every day and different challenges. And I think also the industry we are in is really exciting because that also changes constantly. It's not like the solar plants we built 15 years ago is the same as we do now. There's so many changes technologically, commercially, and that also keeps one interested and engaged.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that you mentioned there was all about sort of working with diverse teams and personalities and getting new staff on board and joiners. But often companies will say, when they're employing, as long as they believe in renewables, then it's a good company culture fit. What advice do you have to, make to others that are looking to hire to make sure that those potential candidates' values align to the company? And how do you assess it to make sure that those candidates are going to fit well into the team?
No, 100%. Look, I think it is important that candidates kind of have enthusiasm around what they want to do. I think, especially when you are employing juniors, they might not have experience in renewables and, they might say, oh, I want to save the planet and all of that. But I generally typically look for someone that's enthusiastic because I think that's, if you are enthusiastic about something, you're willing to learn. And I think for me, the willingness and openness to learn is very important. And I kind of tend to look out for that in, new candidates because not everyone has the answers, and you can learn the technical and commercial aspects, but you must be willing to learn. And I think that's very important to me. And I think, another aspect that I find quite important, and it's also a value that we have at SPS, is kind of dedication. So it's kind of, understanding if this person is going to come in and give their all, not necessarily for the business, but also for themselves, so someone that, has got that go-getter attitude. And, I've employed people in the past that had no experience in this field, but it's completely around their attitude and, the way they approach things. So I think that's very important to kind of gauge people on that basis.
Yeah. And I think that sort of willingness to learn sort of coincides in a way with that self-awareness where, they identify that maybe I don't know this is what I need to upskill in. And, that is those go-getters where they, they acknowledge it and they're ready to sort of bridge those gaps.
Yes, exactly. And I think, if you are open to learning and like you rightly say, you've got that awareness to know what you don't know rather than just going, oh, I am perfect, I know everything, you can't teach me anything. And that's a very tough person to deal with.
Yeah, exactly. Anja, tell me, in your view, what are some of if you could go back in time, what are some of the, I suppose, leadership skills or experience if you could unlearn fast and, never have learned that and been mistaken with, what is micromanagement and delegation and things like that? What would you say the biggest things that you wish you could have unlearned faster?
Sure. I think letting go, definitely would have liked to unlearn that quicker. So important. Like we said, delegation has been a challenge. And I think, I've just seen how people can thrive if you just give them the opportunities. I think letting go. And I think, something that I also struggled with as a young leader, which I wish I could have unlearned quicker, is also that aspect which we spoke about, is that people don't always respond in the same way you respond. So, understanding that people respond to things differently, and rather than trying to approach something in the same way that you think will work, rather trying to puzzle out how that person would kind of respond. And like I said, no two people are the same. And that is it is challenging for a leader to figure that out, especially when you kind of younger, you want to try and make your mark. And I think people sometimes feel like leadership is kind of being authoritative and dictative. And it's not necessarily that, but I think you kind of envisage that's what you want to be as a leader. Like, say, you don't want to show weakness. You don't want to, you want to know the answers. And I think for me, I always thought that's what leadership should be. And I think in the beginning, I kind of went there. And what I've come to realize over time is that being a compassionate leader actually means a lot more. Like we said earlier, acknowledging weakness, treating people as persons, giving people space, and, let people do their own thing, not tell them what to do. So I think that is something that I wish I could have unlearned quicker, because I do believe that, I've made mistakes with people in the past that I wish I could have undone, So I think, I think those people could have thrived much more in the environment and have much more growth rather than me kind of just.
But I think a lot of that also dovetails into, building rapport with the team and building trust, which is so crucial, I suppose, at all levels. For most leaders, it's always good to learn it quickly. At some point, leaders always need to learn it along the management ropes. And then, Anja,
100%.
for you, what would you say, given your, career growth, personal career growth, and your team's growth over the next couple of years, what kind of skills do you want to master from a leadership and management perspective that you think's most going to be most useful, and maybe also in the lens of an evolving world of technology? I mean, that sort of changes the playing field of management to a degree and might open up some time. What would it be to you?
Oh, look, I think a hot topic right now is obviously AI. It's got to bring it in, right? I think, there's definitely space for technology to take away things from management that enables them to spend more time with their team. Like AI can alleviate, I think one thing I can probably all managers can attest to is like emails overcrowding. So I think, if you can have a tool that can assist you with just that day-to-day management, helping you schedule meetings, replying on things, I think it goes such a long way to kind of build that with the team, because I think what happens sometimes is that we get overwhelmed as leaders with information, and, our time is very limited, and you'd to rather than read for 500 emails, you'd rather spend that time and with your team and, helping them with things and spending time if they want to ask questions and things like that. So I do think there's a space for technology there. Yeah, I think in terms of further growth in leadership, it's like I said, never to stop learning. I think in an evolving technological world, it is important that, you find a space where you can still contribute, because I think there is going to be lots of areas where AI is going to take over. Let's not go there with Skynet and all that. I'm more speaking to like, luckily in the industry which we are in, it's still very niche, and I think there's still a lot that we can bring as humans, which is kind of, the more strategic thinking of solutions and things like that. But I think there's a lot of work that can be done that kind of takes out the day-to-day grind, that opens up the space for it. And I'd like to believe that it makes it easier for you rather than take away from you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I mean, going back to that report I conducted, especially the younger skills or professionals sort of under the 5 years of experience, one of their biggest thing was, they want more time with their managers for career growth and, learning and things like that. And it all does come back down into that concept is, yes, AI is great, but it's never going to take that knowledge of an experienced professional that can bestow and teach and mentor their team so that they actually achieve more in a shorter amount of time than not.
No, 100%. Like you said, I think it's the knowledge. But I think also one thing that the AI probably won't be able to teach them is like these things we were talking about today, right? It's kind of the more kind of say soft skills, if I can say it like that, and that you can't, well, I'd like to hope that, AI is not going to be as able to teach that to your team, and just how to deal with people and deal with professionals. And yes, the knowledge is also important, but it's kind of just basic, how to conduct yourself in a professional environment. And like you said, I think that is a space where we can benefit from that.
Yeah. And Anja, then I think pretty much the last question I have for you is, what advice would you give other managers and leaders in the renewable space in Africa?
Okay, so I'll say, definitely not an expert in the field, like had made a lot of mistakes, but I think, again, like I said earlier, by making mistakes you learn a lot. So if I can like pander my advice just from my own perspective, I think, it basically boils down to three things that I would, give to future leaders. I think the first one is to, treat your team members as humans, acknowledging that they are people, not just worker bees, and see them as such. And that coupled with that is kind of showing respect. I've really come to realize how much people value respect. And I think sometimes it happens if you're a senior person in the business, you might have the perception that your time and is more important than everyone else's. And it's not the case. I think it's so important that if the CEO needs your time, or a client needs your time, or the junior design engineer needs your time, is that you give them the respect and the time that you can give to them. Acknowledging emails, replying to meetings, making the time to sit with someone. It really goes a long way. And I think that also kind of plays into the element that, see people as people, and because that gives them that they feel valued. And I think that's very important. And I think the other thing that I think is really important is to never stop learning. I still sometimes make mistakes. I think it's, I've learned a lot, and when sometimes you are also only human, so have grace with yourself. But I think if your intention is good and you've got the right intention, that it will come out through your actions, and always just be open to learn. I think that is, I would say, the two most important things that I can give some advice on.
I think that's great advice. And I think at the end of the day, people have to remember that there's someone on the end of that conversation, and it depends on how you engage with them and how you respect them, if you're going to get the most out of them and inspire them to, go the extra mile for you. They don't feel deflated and, lose.
Exactly. They've got to know you're on their team, like you're a team and you're on their team, and that you want them to succeed.
Yeah. That's fantastic advice. But Anja, thank you very, very much. And to all our followers that want to connect with you, where's the best place or platform for them to connect?
I think the best platform for me, as I'm not TikTok as an older millennial, is on LinkedIn. So you'll find me Anja Visagie at LinkedIn. So please drop me a message, or yes, you can also visit the SBS website for more info on our business.
Amazing. And to all our followers, remember to subscribe or follow us on LinkedIn for the latest news and updates. Thanks so much, Anja. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Lindy. Bye, everybody.